Mhm. Hello, everyone. Welcome this afternoon. And for those of you that it's still morning, good morning to all of you and good afternoon to all of you west of the Pacific time zone. I'm gonna wait for folks to join, but if you all can please mute yourselves on entry so we don't have a lot of background noise. We have a significant number of people registered for this webinar today, and it'll be difficult to hear if everyone is not on mute. So if you all could mute upon entry, and we're gonna let a few more people drop in, and then we will get started. Thank you all for joining us. I want to let everybody know that we are recording this webinar, and we will put the recording on the NCII website tomorrow. So if you have stakeholder groups, either within your institution, within your state, or within your network that you think will benefit from listening to the webinar, if you can just go to the NCII website tomorrow. The website is on the final slide in the presentation. You should be able to find the recorded webinar there, and you can share it widely. And we're going to get started. My name is Gretchen Schmidt. I have the privilege of serving as a senior fellow for the National Center for Inquiry and Improvement. I'm going to give a short introduction of myself and then turn it over to my colleague and friend, Chris Baldwin, who will introduce himself. And we will go through a series of slides about the Rural Guided Pathways project, and then we'll answer questions at the end. If you can put questions that you have in the chat as we go along, and we will leave plenty of time at the end to answer specific questions after we get through the content. We're hopeful we'll get through many of the questions that you have during the time of the webinar, but we're very happy to answer specific questions once we get through the slides. As I said, my name is Gretchen Schmidt, and I came to NCII as a senior fellow about 2 years ago, 18 months to 2 years ago. Prior to my time at NCII, I led the guided pathways work for the American Association for Community Colleges. So this is work that is very near and dear to my heart, and something I passionately believe is changing the fabric of community colleges in the country. And we are thrilled with the support from the Ascendium Education Group to have funding to do a project that is really focused on the capacity and the needs of rural institutions. In the original Guided Pathways projects nationally and the subsequent state-based projects that have followed, it has been materials and resources that have been more globally used across the sector, but very often the materials have not been targeted to the capacity and the needs of rural institutions, which we recognize are very different than your urban and suburban counterparts. So I am privileged to have the opportunity to work on this project for the coming 3 years with my colleague and friend, Chris Baldwin, who I will turn it over to introduce himself.
Thank you, Gretchen, and good afternoon to those of you on the eastern part of the country, and good morning to those of you on the western part of the country. My name is Chris Baldwin. I too am a senior fellow at NCII. I've been with NCII for approximately a month. I officially joined NCII after working with them as a consultant for several years, and I'm really excited about this particular project. Before being at NCII and before being an independent consultant, I worked for Jobs for the Future in a couple of different stints, and was very involved in the early stages of guided pathways and projects like Completion by Design that came before it. I ran the Michigan Center for Student Success for a number of years, and as part of my role at Jobs for the Future, I helped create a number of those student success centers in other states. So, and all along was very involved in dialogue and discussions with institutions and states about how to implement guided pathways. And so I too have been very engaged in this conversation over a long period of time, and just very excited to be involved with this project for a variety of reasons. I grew up in a rural part of Ohio. My family still lives in a rural part of Ohio, and I am very deeply committed to the rural quality of life. And so we, as we'll talk about, really both felt that there was a real need for rural institutions and rural communities to have a greater voice and greater representation in some of the national work. And so it's very exciting to be here today and to be sharing this with you. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen. She's going to walk through the first part of the slides, and then I'll cover some of the details about the initiative in a little bit. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Chris, can you go to the first slide, please? So we welcome all of you. We are not doing introductions. We have a significant number of folks on, but we are happy to have, we had well over 100 people registered for this webinar from 40 some odd states in the country. We were thrilled to have the response that we had to the application process. And so this is really the overview of what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to start with a conversation that stemmed from a rural leaders group that NCII has convened for the last 18 months. And some work that we did with these rural leaders to talk about the issues and concerns in what rural leaders in rural community colleges need to do to be most viable post-COVID, both for their students and the communities that they serve. And we'll talk about some briefs that we put together with these rural leaders last year. We're going to give an overview of the Rural Pathways Project, the institutes, the way the model is for this project, as well as the curriculum and the selection process. And so, and also what you all should consider when you're applying and going through the application process as individual institutions. And so, Chris, you can advance it. A bit about NCII. NCII, we work together with colleges, state-based projects, communities, regions, and individual institutions to implement large-scale reform efforts focused in the area of guided pathways and student financial stability. So we work in a lot of different settings. We are facilitating the California Guided Pathways Project, the 2.0 in California. We work with the Student Success Centers to support their work in implementation of guided pathways. We just released a series of briefs and support services and structures around student financial stability. And so this is something that we do across the organization in different settings, but really focused on guided pathways and student financial stability. Okay, Chris. So, and a quick overview of the project. So this is going to be a national cohort of 15 rural community colleges that will work together, very similar to the AACC 1.0 and 2.0 projects in state-based projects in Texas and California, Michigan, Ohio, and other places that will work together as a collective to implement guided pathways at scale in their institution. So part of this is, and you will see in the participation agreement that was shared in the application materials, is that the college president on behalf of their institution has to commit to designing and implementing a better student experience at their college using the guided pathways framework as the model. To collaborate with key stakeholders in their region to increase economic opportunity and economic and social mobility of the community through the guided pathways lens in a cross-sector approach. As I'll talk about in the next slide, this is something that's different in this project than in projects, whether it be national projects or state-based projects that have come before this project, is that these key stakeholder groups must be part of the project throughout the duration and part of the core team at the college throughout the 3 years of the project. We will work with partner organizations to develop new resources, materials, support structures, knowledge development, and knowledge management based on evidence-based reforms that are targeted now at the rural context. So this is very different. We are going to start using the materials that have been developed historically to support guided pathways implementation, but really modifying them with the lens of the capacity and the issues faced by rural colleges and rural communities. We've been asked by a number of folks as we led up to this informational webinar about the cost for the colleges. So the overall cost of the technical assistance and the support of the project is covered by the Ascendium Education Group and a small group of regional funders. So the colleges themselves, you as institutions, the selected institutions, have to cover the cost of travel to and from the institutes for your team. There is room for 8 team members in the funded part of the project, but we will also in some hotels have the capacity to have larger teams, but the colleges will have to cover the cost of additional members for the team if we allow or have space and capacity. But we have the cost to cover 8 folks, that is hotel costs, breakfast, lunch, break, food, all the technical assistance and coaching and the materials. So the travel and the cost of the dinners at the institutes are required for the colleges to support as part of the project. These are our committed partners. As we go into the project, we will bring other partners and other subject matter experts in as we go along. But as we start out the gate, as I said, we have the majority of the funding is from the Ascendium Education Group. There will be a small number of regional funders that support this project as well. We are in the process of going through the fundraising and the application process at a number of smaller regional funders. Our longtime partners, the Community College Research Center and the College Excellence Program at the Aspen Institute, are committed partners in this work. We're thrilled to be partnering with Civic Lab, who has led regional sector partnership work that has not been often centered in with the community college or higher education as the intermediary, but has used different backbone partners in their sector work. We are bringing them in as a community partner liaison and subject matter expert in this work, and we're very happy to have them as part of this work. There will be other higher ed partners that come in as we go along, as we really round out the curriculum for this work and bring others to the table, depending on the content area of expertise that they have. So we are thrilled to have this group of partners signed up already and others in the wings as we move forward towards implementation of the work. As I said in the beginning, there is a connection to the Rural Community College Leaders Series that NCII facilitated for the last 18 months with a group of rural community college leaders that we brought together in a virtual setting to really talk about issues that rural community colleges are facing in the current societal COVID, post-COVID, declining enrollments, all the other issues that you very know acutely as community college leaders that you're facing in real time at your institutions. We released a series of briefs in September of last year. They can be found at the link at the bottom of this slide. But this work from these rural community college leaders really informed and shaped this regional guided pathways project that's focused on rural institutions. As you can see, brief 6 is really focused on collaborating to create regional economic opportunity. That brief was authored by the Chancellor of University of Arkansas Community College at Batesville, Brian Schunk, and co-authored by the president of Carl Albert State College, Jay Faulkner. And they talk very much about the importance of creating longstanding, sustained community relationships and leveraging those relationships as you implement institutional reforms at the college. And we built on this college going mindset that Bill Seymour talks about in this brief 1. you could see in the other briefs, the advising in the student basic need, holistic student supports particular, are areas that are addressed very primary in the implementation of guided pathways. And all of these briefs are written as discussion guides, very much action-oriented documents that you could take back to your institution and use them as starting points with your stakeholder groups, both internally and externally, to really dig deeper in these issues and framed under the umbrella of implementation of transformational student success reforms at community colleges in a rural setting. And with that, I think is there one more slide? And so what is innovative about this project? And I'll reiterate that this project is the first of its kind that is focused only at rural institutions. We have actually received a lot of questions around how we are defining rural. And we purposefully, because we wanted a diverse group of institutions, as well as a diverse setting context for the institutions in the project, we did not define rural or rural serving. We put questions in the application that give you all as institutions the opportunity to talk about your setting, your community, the rurality of your institution, how you serve your rural service region, as well as the students that you serve. So we want you to talk to us about the rurality of your institution, but also the rurality of your service region. And is also the first time that community partners will be an integral part of the core team in the journey of implementation for the duration of the project. And I'll let Chris go into that in more detail as he talks about the project in more specificity. So with that, Chris, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gretchen. And again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to share a few slides about some of the specifics. All of this information is available on NCII's website, so there's really not a lot new. The criteria that I talk about towards the end isn't posted there, but we'll cover that in here. And so, so this first slide here is really about the structure of the professional development and support throughout. And this is very similar to other national projects that have happened, other state-based projects that have happened. And it's the core of the project is really centered around the 6 2.5-day institutes. And as Gretchen mentioned, individuals, colleges will, in their communities, will be able to bring an 8-member team. What we've seen historically with those teams is that, 1, 2, or 3 of the people are the core folks that are at every one of the institutes, and some of the people and the individuals that come will change. And that certainly, I'll talk in a few minutes about the curriculum, that makes a lot of sense, and we'll certainly give you guidance as we get into that. But the core of the support over the next 2.5 years is the institutes. Each college will be assigned a coach to support your work, and you will interact with those coaches in both the in-person and virtual settings throughout the project. One of the things that we are also adding to this particular project is a number of subject matter experts that are going to be available for you on specific topics. We'll have an individual that's going to focus on workforce. We're going to have an individual that's going to be a partner and help us think about the connections with K-12. Civic Lab that Gretchen already mentioned is going to be a partner with us in terms of community engagement. And we also have an individual that's going to serve as a point person for the college presidents or CEOs to interact with throughout the process. Those individuals won't be assigned to individual colleges, but will be more floaters that can support the work as individual colleges progress through it. The next piece is site visits. Every college will have one site visit from their college coach or from their pathways coach once a year. And so you'll get 3 visits with your coach on campus. As we get into the work later in the spring, we'll talk more about how to take the best advantage of those site visits, but that's an important piece for you to connect with your coach and them to also have a better understanding of the context in which you're working. Office hours. Each team will be able to participate in 2 virtual office hours per semester that will involve individuals from the partners and primarily NCII and the coaches, but we'll also have partners that are involved in some of those interactions as well. And that's an opportunity twice per semester for the individual colleges to bounce ideas off of us, or to ask questions, or to hear about specific ideas that we might be able to share. Similarly, every college will be invited to virtual consultancies. These will largely involve multiple institutions that are wrestling with some similar issues. And so we'll bring folks together, and you'll have an opportunity to talk to your colleagues at other colleges. Those will be facilitated by those of us at NCII, as well as the coaches that are involved with your work on an individual basis. The other thing that's not on here that we will do multiple times throughout per year is we'll have topical webinars that will be available for all of the participants in the project to attend, and folks in your campus. We'll circulate those broadly on specific topics as we go throughout the content in the curriculum. I mentioned the institutes. They are central to the structure of this program and this project, and so there's 6 institutes, 2 per year, between basically June of this year and April of 2024. You can see the dates for each of these. We've tried to have a balance between not usual suspects in terms of where the institutes will be, but we also needed to balance travel time. We talked with a group of presidents and individuals, the leadership group, the community that Gretchen spoke about. We asked them about how to best structure this, and should we do all of these at rural campuses? And the general comment was, if it takes you a full travel day on each end of the institute, that's going to knock folks out for almost an entire week of being on campus. And so we're sensitive to that. So we're trying to balance what this would look like. We will do the second institute at a rural campus. We're finalizing where that's going to be. But the rest of them, the in-person ones, will be at a little bit larger hubs so that folks can get to and from them readily and easily. The 4th institute is going to be a virtual institute. And as I said, we'll get into the specifics of what happens at each of these institutes as we progress a bit further into the work in the spring. Very quickly, this is just a high level overview of what the curriculum for the project is going to be. It's certainly, in aspects of it, mirror what we have done with other Pathways institutes and projects, both state and national projects, but it does have a very different flavor to it because of the engagement with community partners. And so we're in the process of finalizing this curriculum right now, and we have an advisory group that we're working with on this. And so these topics I think these are pretty solid in terms of what the topics we'll cover are, but the order of them may change as we sort of work through the specifics of the curriculum. What we do know is this first topic, the idea of creating an infrastructure of opportunity. And I know David Dotson, a good friend and colleague of this project and an advisor of the college, the project, has shared with us this important language around how do you create an infrastructure of opportunity in your communities. And so, yes, the college is a central player in that, but there needs to be other voices in the room. And that's really where we will start the project, and with the first institute in June. That will definitely be there. Then we'll progress into aspects of the guided pathways framework. The second bullet there is thinking about your program structure, your program mix, and what that needs to look like over time, and is it meeting the needs of your community and the individuals in your community. The connection to the college and the connection to programs, and what's the engagement with the community partners around that really gets to Bill Seymour's brief that Gretchen mentioned around the college-going mindset, and how do you more aggressively and in more sophisticated ways reach out to the community and meet them where they are versus waiting for them to come to you. Certainly thinking about how student financial stability is integrated with your work at the college. Even before the pandemic, there were obviously lots of challenges individual students and families were dealing with. The pandemic has just magnified that. That's true across the country, but we know it's particularly true in rural communities. And so that will be an important part of this dialogue as well. Teaching and learning is a core pillar of the guided pathways work. And how do you make sure that students are learning what they need to know so that they're going to be successful in after their time at the institution, and how does that connect with what your needs are in the community. And then importantly, how do you build continuous improvement and sustainability structures into all of this work? Guided pathways is not something that happens in a short period of time. Implementing the principles and the practices of guided pathways takes time, and you have to build momentum, and you have to build continuous improvement and support to keep it going. And so those are broadly the topics that we will be covering as we go through the various institutes. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the selection process. In terms of the timeline, you can see here, obviously today we're having the informational webinar. Applications are due on March 1st. Our plan is to announce the colleges on April 13th. It might be a little bit before that, but likely will be mid-April. We'll do a college orientation on May 11th, and then we'll have an orientation with community partners in early June, and a date that we are going to be settling very soon. I will say, in terms, after the applications are submitted, our process will be to go through a two-step process. The first part of it is we will have a series of readers. Every application will be read by 2 individuals and scored based on criteria that I'm going to share in a few minutes. From the readings, we will then whittle down the list of institutions that to a list of finalists, probably 20, 25 finalists, that we will then conduct a series of interviews with those institutions. Right now, the intent is the latter part of March and early April is when we will be doing the interviews with campuses. And so, again, the two-step process of reviewers reading the applications, and then a series of interviews for finalists. Again, just as a reminder, you can find all of the information that we're sharing about the project on NCII's website, and specifically the application and the participation agreement can be found on the NCII's website at the link at the bottom of this page. Applications need to be submitted to Sarah Kale, who is on this call with NCII by the end of the day on March 1st. So that's generally the process. Okay, we've had a lot of questions about who should apply for this, and so there's a few things that we have in mind as we're thinking about this. This is not particularly a project for an institution that hasn't done any thinking about guided pathways. If you're not yet at that point, there are other opportunities. In fact, CCRC is having another summer institute this summer. Some of you participated in their summer institute last summer. Those are great opportunities to really get started with guided pathways. But the important aspects of what we're looking for is that colleges have already begun to lay the groundwork. They've started making the case on campus for why these reforms are important, or they may even be further along and they've started to implement aspects of the guided pathways practices and principles. This project, you may be an institution that has already done a fair amount of guided pathways work. We're also interested from hearing from you, because we are trying to, because this is very specialized towards rural communities and rural institutions, we want to bring in individual institutions that may be a little bit farther along. We want a mix of institutions in terms of where they are on the trajectory of guided pathways implementation. So certainly if you're an institution that has spent several years thinking about guided pathways, but because the pandemic threw you off your schedule in terms of things you wanted to do, this is a great way to think about re-engaging that work and deepening that work in places where you need to revisit it. So certainly more advanced colleges are welcome to apply as well. Overall, the successful colleges will be able to demonstrate that they have the internal culture and the external partnerships to advance this work. And that is, of all the things that we'll talk about, that's ultimately what we're going to be looking for when we review the applications and go through the interviews. Okay, so these criteria for the application review, these are drawn really directly from the questions on the application. So we were very pointed about what we asked. We tried to develop an application that wasn't too onerous, but would also give us sufficient information so that we can make informed decisions about what's going on in your communities and at your institution. So the first one is, obviously we want to know about the area that you serve and the students you serve. This is a great place where you will have an opportunity to articulate your own definition of why you consider yourself a rural institution and how you define that in the area that you serve. We're interested in knowing about national or state student success initiatives that you've been a part of, your institution has been a part of, and or regional economic development or economic mobility initiatives that you might have been a part of. So it's an opportunity to talk about the innovative things that you've already tried to do. We're interested in knowing about what the economic mobility opportunities and constraints are. We understand that some communities are really struggling and they've got challenges for a variety of reasons. Others may be on a different path and a different trajectory. We want to hear about both of those things and the things that might constrain this work for you at your institution over time. We definitely want to hear about existing college partnerships. We don't expect colleges, in fact, it's probably not optimal for colleges to go out and create a bunch of new partnerships. Optimally, this work would be built on off of longstanding relationships that are going to help you go deeper and farther. And so we're interested in hearing about those partnerships. Certainly, if there's new opportunities that have emerged, we want to hear about those as well. But it's really about what is the basis of the community engagement and partnership that you're going to bring to the table for this particular project. The college's experience with guided pathways to date, including developmental education reforms. We certainly want to have an understanding of what, if you're down the road a bit on guided pathways, what have you accomplished under that framework? And particularly developmental education reform has been ongoing for some time. We're interested in hearing about how your institution has tried to wrestle with the issue of students that are landing in developmental education courses and how you might have restructured that with math pathways or co-requisite designs or those types of things. We want to hear about your college's readiness to implement guided pathways, and that includes things as the application says, what's your IT system? Do you have IR capacity? What's the culture at your institution? How's your board's engagement? So this is really about the enabling conditions that you have in place that are going to help you to implement guided pathways. And then last, but certainly not least, we want to hear about what your priorities for this project are as you try to advance guided pathways at your college. So we've rattled off a whole lot. I don't see a lot of questions in the chat other than the question about rural that Gretchen has asked. So we're at the point now that we can certainly take questions optimally, because there's so many people. It would be optimal if folks would put them in the chat. Gretchen, anything you want to add while we wait for folks to post their questions?
We will send out this recording in a Dropbox to everyone that was registered. We realized that Zoom capped, even though they let more than 100 people register, they capped the room size. And so we opened it up beyond 100 part of the way through. So if folks in your college were unable to join, or folks in your network are unable to join, we are going to post it, but I will send it out to everyone in the registration later on today. And so I start to see questions coming in. So let me.
So the first question that I saw was about the location for the first institute. It'll be in Minneapolis. Gretchen, I don't recall the specific hotel, but we'll be in Minneapolis for the first institute in June.
A question about the commitment expectation for the community partners. So we expect that there will be a core group of identified community partners that will be part of the core team at the college. We will ask that community partners come to the institute that is most relevant to the place that they sit in the community and the topic and the content at hand. The first institute will be very much focused on setting a vision for this work that includes community partners. We also expect that the community partners will participate in the coaching visits when the coach comes to the campus for their annual site visit. and also participate in virtual support structures as it is relevant to the role that the community partner plays.
Yeah, so just playing off of that, the next question is from Janine, and it's really about, would it be ideal to utilize our partnership with our community action agencies? You know, our thinking about the community partners is essentially, you need to define the partners that are your strong partners that are going to help you move this work. Originally, we thought about being a bit more prescriptive and saying you need a superintendent and you need the head of your WIB board. And what we decided to back off of that being prescriptive, because we want you to define who your partners are and are going to help you move this work. Every community is different, every institution is different, so we didn't want to force you to bring individuals that might not be as supportive as you'd like them to be. So I hope that answered that question. But we have a point of view, but we want you to define who your best partners will be for this.
I think I can answer the question around the technical assistance being customized and the action plan in the same response. And if there's a follow-up question, please let me know. So there will be a general curriculum that is developed for the duration of the project, so that the institutes will have a fairly standard format that is a balance of keynotes from national experts, national partners, institutional leaders and places that have promising practices in the content area that we're discussing. There will be breakout sessions, and then there will be team time sessions, working sessions, that is really the bulk of the institutes, the 2.5-day institutes that you'll participate in with your coach, that will be facilitating your journey through the implementation of pathways based on where your college sits. And so, as Chris said, we will have a range of institutions, some that are much further along in their journey, some that are restarting work that got stalled, some that are on the beginnings of their implementation journey. And we will match you with the coach that actually has the best fit for you based on where you are in your implementation and the experience of the coach. We're also going to use a group of subject matter experts to really be like a phone a friend for you all on content areas. So around K-12, connections to K-12, workforce partnerships, things around building community impact, student financial stability. So we really are going to customize your journey to where you sit, using a much more global curriculum is the starting point for the work. The action plan templates and the documents will be the same across the project, so that we have continuity and we can track people's implementation journey, but it will start from where you sit as an institution and be customized to the work that you need to do, and building and leveraging on the work that you've done already. This is not a reset. This is not, we want you to stop doing what you're doing. This is building on and leveraging the relationships, the commitments, the work that you have done already, and accelerating the implementation of that work with support structures that we build on for you all.
Thanks, Gretchen. I'm going to answer Tasha's question about, is this a grant opportunity or a partnership in terms of research? So institutions that are selected will not receive a pass-through grant for this. You will receive substantial professional development and support that we've talked about, but there won't be a specific pass-through grant to the institutions. We will, however, be exploring opportunities for institutions to leverage other funding opportunities throughout this. And so we will be some of which we've already identified, others that we will identify along the way, and we will help to position institutions to pursue those resources. In terms of the partnership in research, it is a partnership in terms of research to the extent that this is really the first time that this kind of a project has been focused on rural community colleges. In fact, CCRC's role in this is that of a research partner. They're very interested in doing research on rural institutions and have already started doing some of that. And so this will be a continuation of that. And much of what we learn collectively through this will be scaffolded and built into other opportunities, replicated either in other national projects or state-based projects or the like. So hopefully, Tasha, that answers your question, but I think it's definitely an opportunity to engage in a longer-term research conversation.
Chris, can you go back and talk about the definition of rural and rural serving for the project? Because it's come up again, and I think it will continue to come up. And so for folks that join late, can you circle back to that, please?
Yeah, so as everyone I think probably knows, there are numerous definitions of rural. And so one of the challenges certainly we've had and Ascendium has had as they've decided to engage in investments in rural communities is how do you define that? Certainly the IPEDS approach is one way to do it. It's based on where your college is physically located and really ignores what your service area is. The census definition is even more restrictive in the respect that it really just focuses on how many people live in a quote urban area versus a non-urban area. So those are sort of the flawed definitions. The US Department of Agriculture has a different definition that talks about population in areas, and that's more helpful. I will say there were 2 reports that just came out in the last 2 weeks that really tried to define what rural means, both in terms of location and in terms of rural serving. As Gretchen said earlier, we chose not to define rural because we didn't want to constrain individual institutions that think of themselves as rural serving or rural located because of the challenges with definitions. So we didn't set a specific definition. We encourage you in your application when you're talking about your service area and your student population to articulate your own definition of how you think about rural. We will be looking at some of those various definitions and overlaying the institutions that apply will be overlaying those with those definitions so that we can see what kind of representation we have in the group. But our goal is to have a broad representation, and rural communities are very diverse in a whole host of ways. And so our goal is to get to a diverse set of institutions in this cohort. So hopefully that answered the question. I understand that that's probably not satisfactory for some folks, but part of the challenge of the rural work in general is that there are numerous definitions, and picking any one is actually a problem. All right, let's see, Gretchen, any other questions, or did we address them all?
I think we got through the ones that are in the chat, but I want to give the opportunity for a minute or two to make sure that after everyone's digested this, that there's no follow-up questions, although our contact information is there, and we are, there's a question on deliverables. And so, we are going to be doing, as your action plan documents are done after each institute, you will have coaching visit reports that come from your coaching visit. We will qualitatively be monitoring and tracking the implementation of your work. In the first Pathways project and the second one, in many of the state-based projects, if you all have participated in them, CCRC had developed a scale of adoption assessment instrument that monitored the implementation at scale of different factors within the Guided Pathways framework. We are working with CCRC to develop a scale of adoption-like instrument for this rural project that really looks at the capacity of rural institutions more specifically, but also includes the community partner piece of the work. And so that qualitative assessment will be required annually so that we can track qualitatively the implementation efforts. We will also ask for the college to submit annually data on the key performance indicator metrics for Guided Pathways that CCRC and we have been using in national projects. And we can share those with you They are short-term key performance metrics that we know now, based on years of research, are predictive of downstream retention and completion. And so it is a small number of metrics. And I think even with limited institutional research capacity, that it will not be a significant lift to submit annually, and then a qualitative analysis based on implementation of practices at scale. Lisa, we did not actually ask for letters of support from your community partners. We did ask that the president and the participation agreement list the community partners along with their role and why they were selected to be on the core team, so that the president signs off on the selection of identification of community partners, as well as the reason that group of community partners was selected to be part of it. We do not need letters of support or letters of agreement from your individual community partners as part of your application.
Any other questions? I think we've now covered everything. Again, as Gretchen said, we inadvertently had the cap on the number of folks that could come in. So if you came in late, we're going to be posting this entire webinar on the NCII website shortly. And we'll also circulate it out to the entire list of everybody that was registered so that they can review it as well. Okay.
It seems like we have a lull, so we will stop recording, and so we wish you all the best of luck. We are